hop in over the next minute or so, but let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. And we hope that you will really find this webinar valuable. I think it's a really interesting and important, but certainly complicated topic that we are going to explore with a few people who are very knowledgeable and know very well what it takes to get this public enterprise model off the ground and working. But let's back up just a moment and think about why we're here and why we're talking about this to begin with. Um, we have this fundamental challenge today as housers, a shortage of new homes, particularly those at prices affordable to persons and households with lower to moderate incomes. And we know that this has been the reality for not just the past year or so, but for a very long time. And it's going to continue to be a problem that we can't solve overnight, regardless of what may or may not happen with federal policy and federal budgets. And so communities across the nation have already been taking innovative steps on their own. Things like housing trust funds, significant zoning reforms to make housing easier to build. But all of these things have kind of one thing in common, which is that they still rely on the common traditional ways to develop new housing. And so a smaller growing cohort of cities and communities across the country are going one step further by standing up a new pathway, really, to finance and build affordable housing by leveraging local resources in a pretty uncommon way until recently, until these communities have really stepped out to innovate. So this new public development model or public enterprise model is something that was first championed by Montgomery County, Maryland. We had one of the main designers of that program at the Governor's Housing Conference last year. Some of you may have been in attendance for that. Folks in Northern Virginia are probably already somewhat familiar with the progress Montgomery County has made just across the Potomac. And so while their approach has certainly been successful, what you'll learn about today is how communities are taking that major concept and tweaking it and making it their own to work in their own communities and their own backyards, which will be very interesting to see. So today we'll hear from three different cities that are, really charting their own unique courses. And so I'm joined by three really great, talented experts. John Majors from Atlanta, Hanneke van Deursen from Chattanooga, and Matt Stern from Chicago. And I'll have each of them introduce themselves very briefly. John, starting with you.
Okay, hey, good morning, everybody. And let's see if I can pull up my slides here.
Well, John, before you do that, just go ahead and tell folks who you are and what you do, and then we'll do the
Sure.
same for Hanneke and Matt.
Okay, and then we'll go through the slides. Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, hey,
Thanks.
John Majors. I am the CEO of Atlanta Urban Development. I see some folks that I know actually in the participant list, so I will share that I actually run with my team a consulting firm. And so when Atlanta Urban Development was stood up, our board made the decision, as opposed to hiring a full-time CEO and staff out of the gate, that they would actually engage my team and I as the staff, the interim staff of Atlanta Urban Development. So we can talk about that if that matters, if people have questions. But right now, we'll just mainly focus on Atlanta Urban Development in the work that we're doing here.
Thanks, John. Hanneke.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Hanneke van Deursen, and I am the Director of Housing Finance for the City of Chattanooga. So I work for the city and come up with all kinds of sort of innovative ways to move the needle on housing, and was the lead on this project, Invest Chattanooga. So I can talk, my presentation will focus particularly on kind of the steps from inside the city to set up this new agency.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. And Matt.
Good afternoon, everyone. Matt Stern from Chicago. Still morning for me in this time zone. I'm a deputy commissioner at the housing department here at Chicago. We are a a city level housing finance agency with an independent allocation of low housing tax credits. So we have a big team that does that work. We also do the bread and butter work of housing departments around the country. Home ownership support programs, home repair programs, rental assistance type support. We are not RPHA, that's Chicago Housing Authority, although we work closely with them. My role is to lead our policy engagement and implementation and process improvement work at the department, which has included both on the policy side, working towards the legislative approvals we need to create our own public development model, and then on the implementation side, actually standing up that entity now that we have those approvals. So that's what I was talking about today. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for being here with us today, Matt. So events like this today and the webinars that House Forward hosts throughout the year are, again, only possible because of our sponsors like Virginia Housing, Bob and Anna Lou Shaber Foundation, Atlantic Union Bank, Dominion, the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond, BCDC, and anybody else who might be on the call who has donated to us in the past. We're very grateful for it. And if you haven't, there's a very easy way to do it online. So I encourage you to do so to support our work. Just a quick note on logistics. The Q&A feature within Zoom is enabled. And so we encourage folks who have questions to go ahead and use that. If the panelists feel like it, they are welcome to type their responses when they're not presenting to any questions they may be able to answer. But we will save the full Q&A discussion until all three of the panelists have presented. And so without any further ado, John, I will hand it off to you to share your slides and get us started.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. Let's see if I can figure this out. All right. Great. You guys seeing the slides?
Yep, just turn your camera on and I think we're good to go.
Yep. Okay. There we go. Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Again, John Majors. I'll be talking today about Atlanta urban development, and let's see if we can. All right. So Atlanta urban development, we're about 2 years old this month, and we were formed to essentially accelerate the development of affordable housing in Atlanta. Mayor Dickens in Atlanta made a campaign promise to build or preserve 20,000 units of affordable housing, and the housing team within the city immediately set to figuring out what the trajectory looked like to get to 20,000 units. And as they stacked up all the different sources of those units, they realized that they would not, the city would fall short. And so one of the many ways that innovation was brought to the table was, let's think through this, what became Atlanta urban development, which was the public-private partnership model that Jonathan mentioned earlier, that had been, really, I would say, exemplified not only internationally but in Montgomery County. They really, in the states, are probably the leaders. I think we would probably argue that Atlanta's, slightly behind them, and then folks like Hanneke and her team in Chattanooga, and then lots of other folks are picking up this model as well. So we are, like I said, we're about 2 years old now, and the biggest thing here is that our job is to accelerate the delivery of affordable housing units. Now, we've got a couple of different tools that we use to do that, and the structure allows that, but the reality is that we are still, use this analogy of building the plane while we're flying it. And so we are learning new ways that we can actually accelerate the delivery of affordable housing every day. So if there is something that comes on our plate and there is something, it's something that we can do and it fits within our structure, then we will figure out how to build that. Speaking of structure, we are a subsidiary of Atlanta Housing. Our financial partner is Invest Atlanta, and then everyone falls under the umbrella of the city of Atlanta. So public land is one of our biggest tools, right? So we've got a deal that we'll talk about a little bit later, Midtown Fire Station, which, if you've been to Atlanta, Midtown is one of the highest rent districts in Atlanta. There is an existing single-story fire station that, of course, is owned by the city in Midtown. And so we are going to relocate the fire department from that one site. We are going to tear down that fire station, build back a new fire station, but then we're going to build back approximately 300 units of affordable housing on top of that fire station. But for the fact that that was a piece of dirt with a fire station on it that is owned by the city, there's no way you could ever afford to build any type of affordable housing in Midtown Atlanta. We also have financial incentives that are only available to public entities. And so one of the ways we work with private developers who bring deals to us is that if they deed us their land and then we ground lease it back to them, that makes it technically public land, and we're able to use some of the tax incentives. Now, why would we do that? We would do that. We're basically trading incentives to get to affordability, right? And so if a developer, if we're starting the project and it's public land, or if a private developer brings us a deal, it needs to meet our affordability requirements. So we need to have 20% of those units at 50% AMI and 10% of those units at 80. And that's sort of in the Atlanta metro area. Here's what those numbers look like. Here are the different neighborhoods that are focus areas. There are 7 focus areas in the city of Atlanta, and we don't view deals exclusively in those areas, but we really focus in those areas and look to make a broad impact in those areas. But you'll see that the deals that we're doing are spread geographically throughout the city. Here's just some of those deals. Midtown Fire Station that we talked about, Thomasville Heights. So we work with different partners as well. So we have an intergovernmental agreement with Atlanta Housing. We have an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Atlanta for deals that are owned by the city right now. We also have an intergovernmental agreement, and this was not originally contemplated, but I think this is something that makes a lot of sense. We work with Atlanta Public Schools, and they've essentially said, look, we are in the business of educating children. If there are sites that Atlanta Public Schools owns that could be used for something else in the meantime, until they're needed, let's build housing there. And then if we need to come back and buy more land 20 or 30 or 40 years from now to build schools wherever those schools are needed, then they would rather do that than try to manage those properties over the next 30 or 40 years. And then this deal, 405 Cooper, that's a deal that is actually a private deal that was brought to the city. All right, and then these are some of the private deals that we're helping out on. The Proctor is a deal. This was an innovative deal that's actually met our affordability requirements with 50% AMI units. And this is a deal that is financed with tenant-based vouchers. Goldman Sachs actually was able to underwrite not project-based vouchers, but actually the value of the tenant-based vouchers here. So this is really an opportunity to drive some innovation on the financing side. Mall West End, if anybody's familiar with Atlanta, this is right outside of the Atlanta University Center. This is a deal that had been at the 5-yard line multiple times, and so we were able to help push that deal across the finish line as well. I feel like I skipped. Nope. Okay, so we did public land, private sector, and then we have a bucket of deals that arguably don't fit anywhere else. And I always use the analogy that I'm old enough to remember Netflix when they would mail you a DVD and then you'd watch it and put it back in the mail and mail it back to them. I believe that when it comes to the affordable housing delivery methods that we're using, we are in the phase of mailing DVDs back to each other, right? We don't know 10, 15, 20 years from now what the delivery of affordable housing will look like, but I can almost guarantee you that it won't look like what it looks like today. And so we are doing deals that probably wouldn't otherwise fit. You know, this is a deal with 23 units of permanent supportive housing. This is really too small of a deal for us to normally do, but we did this deal because it really advanced the industry and advanced the ecosystem, if you will, in in Atlanta on how we deliver affordable housing. We're also working on a deal that will get approved by our board next week to deliver container homes in a neighborhood in the southwestern part of town. Very attractive. When people hear container homes, I think there's a stigma that comes with that, and people have ideas in their head. We are going to break that stigma. We are going to break whatever preconceived notions people have. We're going to deliver an incredibly attractive unit that is going to be very attractive, and it's going to change people's perception. And hopefully it will allow more people to say, hey, this is something that I could see being delivered in my neighborhood because it's attractive enough. And so that allows us to deliver units much more quickly than ground up development. All right. And so that I think we're going to jump into questions later. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Appreciate the details that you shared. And yes, if anybody has any questions on anything that John has presented so far, go ahead and post them in the Q&A. But right now we'll head a couple hours up I-75 and go to Chattanooga and hear from Hanneke.
All right, can everybody see my slides?
Yep, looks great.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much. I'm going to talk today particularly about the process for the city of Chattanooga. You know, we're a much smaller city than Atlanta, and I would say a lower capacity ecosystem. Chattanooga is in southeastern Tennessee. We have 180,000 residents. And these were kind of the 8 steps to creating the public development agency, the path to Invest Chattanooga. So just to back up and let you know kind of where we started with this, Mayor Kelly set aside an unprecedented $33 million for affordable housing in the fiscal year 2023 budget. As you may recall, that was the time when cities were flush with ARPA money and we could really make allocations into initiatives that regularly we were unable to support. So we knew these were one-time dollars. It included $20 million for a revolving loan fund out of the general fund. We studied current best practices and they fell short largely of the mayor's vision. And so we went back to the drawing board to figure out how to maximize the impact of the city's capital, again, recognizing that for us, this was one-time money. Atlanta had just launched AUD, and as mentioned, it's a couple hours down the road. And so we engaged the Center for Public Enterprise, which were the same consultants that had worked with Atlanta, to help us structure our housing production fund and established Invest Chattanooga. So a quick overview of the mechanics. I'm a really visual learner, and so I find that this helps me kind of understand how Invest Chattanooga, how a public development agency can take a project from fully market rate to mixed income. I want to acknowledge that this is kind of turning upside down the way we usually approach affordable housing. Usually we're thinking about like the rents are fixed, there's a gap that it takes to sort of build the building, how do we fill the gap? This starts from the other end. We have a 100% market rate housing development that in our market right now pencils. And that development has rental income. And some of that rental income goes back into the building to pay for maintenance and management. But there's also a large chunk of change that flows forward. And it doesn't just go to the developer's pocket, it goes to pay off all those who have financed the building. And so first and foremost, it goes to the bank, then there's a big chunk of it that's being returned to the equity investor, and the developer gets some of their compensation. What Invest Chattanooga can do is introduce 3 cost savings into this capital stack. So the first one is cheaper debt. And John mentioned this a little bit. As a public agency, we have access to other financing products than a market rate developer does. And so saving a few points on the interest rate, maybe having a longer term or a lower debt service coverage, saves us some cost of capital on that senior loan. The second thing that we bring to the table is the housing production fund, and that's really cheaper equity. So instead of having to partner with a private equity investor who last I heard is looking for mid-20s returns, I'd heard 15 to 20 for a long time, and I think that keeps inching up. So that's a really hard return to hit in this market, and it's why we're seeing deals start to stall, because it's just not matching the reality of building costs and rents. So instead of hitting that super high private equity IRR, Invest Chattanooga is bringing that sort of private equity slice of the capital stack at a much lower rate. We're looking at something around 5%. We're basically trying to make a 1% spread or so over what we're earning with it sitting in the bank. And then the third thing that we bring into this deal is a tax discount, so a pilot. And that's because this is owned by a public agency, and so it falls under the tax exemption. And it's these three cost savings that allow us to lower rents in some of the units and continue to sort of sustainably operate the building without external subsidies. Why this worked for us? First of all, permanent affordability. All the other programs we have a 15, 10, 30-year period, but the ones that require a sort of traditional partnership with the private sector burn off. And so permanent affordability was really an appeal for us. The other appeal was an evergreen housing fund. These weren't one-time grant dollars that we would sink into a project and never see again. We were able to use this one-time investment that the city had and keep recycling it and keep delivering public benefit with it. So to ensure lasting impact, that evergreen component was really critical for us. Another thing this does is strengthen Chattanooga's affordable housing ecosystem. We have a few nonprofit housing developers who have done great work, but there's no public redevelopment authority and a state preemption on inclusionary zoning. So our ecosystem for delivering affordable units has been really limited historically. What Invest Chattanooga does is it allows the sort of LIHTC ecosystem to keep doing what it's doing. Our nonprofit partners are still doing what they're doing, and it opens up a new channel, a new pipeline for development that really leverages the development capacity of our private sector, which we've been delivering thousands of housing units. They're just not income restricted in any way. And so we're tapping into that capacity that exists there, which in our state regulatory context, we cannot compel any of those developers to deliver affordable units. And it's also building long-term public capacity to catalyze mixed income housing. And so we're creating an agency that really understands development economics and can be an active partner in those deals and really get more public benefit because of that. Local control is also a big component. It's not reliant whatsoever on federal funds. It's more important now than ever, but we knew those federal funds were stretched to the max, and so we couldn't come up with a solution that relied on the same pool of resources. It was also a platform for local philanthropy, who have been a huge component of Chattanooga's ecosystem writ large. Our local philanthropic network is expanding their thinking beyond grant making to impact investing and thinking about what moving capital from Wall Street investments and their endowment to Main Street might look like. So these are kind of the selling points for us as we were exploring different approaches. And how we then went about launching this organization, I should say, it took us about a year to put it all together. First, we had to identify the parent organization. So we did an inventory of all the quasi-governmental agencies in Chattanooga. We have a land bank, we have the housing authority, there's the city itself, we have an industrial development board, and we kind of inventoried their capacities, both legal and in terms of programmatic experience and staffing. And for us, far and away, the housing authority had the right combination of both the kind of legal authority and sort of purpose to own housing, and also staff that shows up to work every day and does this kind of thing. And so many of these other boards and agencies, because we're a smaller city, are using city staffing. The housing authority was really kind of where that capacity lied, so that we identified that as our parent organization. The next step was to get buy-in from the local philanthropic community. And here it's really the kind of revolving nature of the fund that was of appeal. The way we see it, the Housing Production Fund is super risk-tolerant capital that'll go in construction at a time where you're really making an investment in the idea of something that'll happen. Once that project's built and leased, the risk profile of it changes entirely. And so at that point, you have a whole other pool of investors who are willing to put their capital forward. And the kind of cost savings by our subsidizing the risk, instead of charging a 20% IRR, asking for 5%, that's subsidizing the risk there, Suddenly that spread isn't so far. You can get a mezzanine investor interested at maybe 8%. If they're an impact investor, maybe they'll come in at 5% by the time the asset's stabilized. And so finding a place that met their risk tolerance and also their appetite to participate in this program was a key part of kind of widening the tent and selling this approach in our local market. The third step was to create a menu of financing options, and this really came down to like, okay, what are our debt instruments? And I think this is something that we continue to look into. Chattanooga does not currently have a way to issue kind of multifamily bonds outside of the LIHTC market, but tax-exempt bond recycling is something some states have set up. And so we're kind of striking the balance between slowly building capacity in our ecosystem to do some of the public financing that can be a really big tool, but also not trying to kind of do everything new at once and prioritize speed and being able to do deals. So we have a sort of menu of options, and it comes down to a particular project, which one we choose. Fourth step was to establish the subsidiary. And so that was going to the Chattanooga Housing Authority. We partnered with them from the beginning and creating a nonprofit subsidiary organization called Invest Chattanooga. We appointed our board. So in terms of org structure, CHA is the parent organization. The City of Chattanooga seeded the Housing Production Fund. Both organizations have intergovernmental agreements with Invest Chattanooga that outline kind of what Invest Chattanooga's purpose is and how the funds are to be used. Both agencies also appoint board members. So the Chattanooga Housing Authority appoints 3 board members. It needs majority control of the board in order to be a legal subsidiary. And then the city appoints 2 additional board members. And with those selections, we've really prioritized development experience and expertise. And so we're fortunate to have some really excellent developers who have kind of stepped forward and are taking on this more civic role in the community. And they have been immense sort of help to being able to get this organization off the ground and really give our CEO a board that understands and that they can work with. The board appoints the CEO, and then initial staffing is being provided by the city and Chattanooga Housing Authority, but the long-term plan for the organization is to be self-funded and have its own staffing. Then we had to transfer the Housing Production Fund. So because we kind of started backwards, a lot of organizations start with rallying around a bond issuance to capitalize the fund. We had the capital, but we had to create the structure for it. And so once that was all ready to go, we went back to our city council and asked them to authorize the transfer of the funds. It was a really big day. We brought the board in and a real highlight of this whole process. Then we sought to find our CEO, and we're fortunate to attract Matt Betzel, who had kind of played the part I played in Chattanooga in Atlanta previously. So I was saying to everybody, there's maybe 3 people who can do this work, and that's one of them. It's amazing that he wants to come work for us. That's a rapidly expanding pool, but we're really happy with that hire, and sorry, John. And then the step 8 has really been finding deals, and that's the phase we're at right now. So we have some public land sites that we've been thinking about doing the early due diligence on, and we've been talking with developers who have projects. And I think today there really is such a constraint on private equity capital that's interested in new development. And so we're finding there are stalled market deals that can't hit those 20% IRR requirements that are really interested in working with us to get the projects done. So those were the 8 steps to creating Invest Chattanooga, and I'm sure we'll chat more afterwards.
Great. Thanks so much, Hanneke. And we will turn it over to Matt now to tell us about Chicago.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. All right. No, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. It's also great to hear from John and Hanneke to talk about and learn about what they are each doing. It's we're all doing such similar things, and we really should talk to each other more than we do. It's very interesting to go third here and note similarities and differences between our approaches. So I just want to set some initial context here. I work for the city in the Department of Housing, which is led by Commissioner Lisette Castañeda, who herself was appointed by our current Mayor Johnson, who was elected in 2023 and began his term then. And we are in the process right now of building a tool very similar to what John and Hanneke both talked about. Our public development model approach is known as green social housing. That is the sort of local term, and I will talk a little bit more about sort of where the green comes from there. And there are many similarities and then maybe some not differences, but things that maybe make where we are somewhat unique. We are doing, I think, the same thing we've been hearing about already, mixed income public development approach. We, to Hanneke's point, did indeed seed a revolving production fund with $135 million of capital from a major bond sale. John said he was building his plane while he was flying it. I would say that we are building our plane while taxiing to the runway. We are very much in the process of creating our approach here right now. We are getting ready to have the first meeting of the board of the new organization we just created. We don't yet have an official project pipeline, but we will by the end of this year. So things are moving very quickly. I want to just give a minute of Chicago context. Chicago is a obviously very large, diverse, and complex city, population of approximately or approaching 3 million, very, very, very large land area. You can run a marathon from the top to the bottom of the city while taking no turns. We have over 1 million housing units. We also have a huge housing affordability gap. The most recent statistic, and the one that is frequently cited around here, is 120,000 units of affordable housing that we need but don't have. That is to adequately house current residents at the income levels that they are currently living at. And this data is old. This data was reported in 2022. The underlying data is actually even older than that. It's really a pre-pandemic angle. So we believe this number to be much, much higher than it is now. I also want to flag, we saw some reporting just this morning indicating that Chicago is last on the list of major metros in the country for new home starts. And so when we think about needing to close this gap and recognizing the larger supply-demand misalignment that is occurring in Chicago like it is around the country, we know that we are facing some of the same challenges that Hanneke and John both talked about from a supply perspective, but also that we're facing some unique challenges that is particularly slowing our ability to produce here in Chicago, which makes the importance of standing up a program like this that much more important. I said this during my introduction at the top, but one of the things that does make Chicago unique is that we are at the city level an independent housing finance agency with a LIHTC allowance. So we spend a lot of our staff effort around here implementing a LIHTC program, which has substantially informed our insights into why we need a housing production fund and how we're going about setting it up. And we do indeed dye the Chicago River green for St. Patrick's Day. I wanted to chat a little bit about how we got to establishing the Green Social Housing Program. And I think it's really interesting to consider the political history of each of the cities and states and counties that is currently taking on programs like this, because the political motivations behind the decision to stand up something like this is deeply important, I think, to understanding why each place's program is the way it is. And that's certainly true in Chicago. So for us, I really think we landed where we landed for four different sort of input sources, some political ones on the left and some policy ones on the right. So Brandon Johnson was elected 2 years ago to mayor on a very progressive platform. He had a wide coalition supporting his election, including a group known as the Illinois Green New Deal. The Illinois Green New Deal Coalition has been pushing for a product that they referred to as green social housing for a long time. It's been a key part of the Green New Deal platform. And this is very, a sort of core social housing perspective here that's looking a lot to European models like Vienna, which is often touted as a leading social housing model. And so they had a very, very clear vision of what outcome they wanted to see, right? They wanted to see decommodified housing that was affordable to the average and to the lower income Chicagoan. But there was less clarity from their end on how do you actually finance that and make it happen. Rotating clockwise here, after Mayor Johnson was initially elected, he convened a wide group of people to put together a transition report outlining his goals for his first term. And that transition report picked up on this green social housing thread and called explicitly for the establishment of a social housing program in one of a suite of strategies focused on decommodifying the market. So there were similar strategies in this document around municipal grocery stores and municipal banking. And then in the residential pillar was this concept of municipally owned housing. So we had this very strong strength pushing us to do this work with the inauguration of Mayor Johnson a couple years ago. But at the same time, the policy team at the housing department had been noticing two things. One is that our LIHTC allocation and our ability to fund rental housing development in the city was woefully insufficient. We do a qualified allocation plan in Chicago every other year, and we routinely get 4 to 5 times more applications than we are able to fund. And so we have a really substantial pipeline of housing that we know needs to be built. I already mentioned our housing gap in the previous slide. And electeds in city council, community groups are regularly calling on us to do more, and we literally don't have the money to do it. And we are always on the hunt for new approaches. Certainly, one of the things that Hanneke spent a few minutes talking about was deeply relevant for us as well here, which was the recognition that federal sources of funding may be dwindling or certainly getting less reliable in the current federal landscape. And so really wanting to figure out what we can do to address this insufficiency ourselves on our own terms. And at the same time, we were watching Housing Opportunities Commission in Montgomery County and seeing the reporting on their really groundbreaking work around taking their sort of core PHA work and turning that on its head a little bit and using this new revolving loan fund model to approach the construction of housing very differently. And so the combination of these sort of now 4 or 5 year old policy observations internally combined with the political window really allowed us to jump forward and create this model. I want to recognize that a lot of the work that we are all doing is very iterative. There are many similarities between what each of the 3 panelists today are doing in our 3 cities to the work that's happening in Montgomery County and elsewhere around the country. And then there are differences within it. And I think it's important to call out where we're all pulling from the same playbook and where the playbook gets modified a little bit to meet the local context. So on the left here, the right off the menu items, I think the things that are generally true across the country with cities that are looking at this This is fundamentally at least for us, a mixed income approach. I actually want to talk to John later because it sounds like he's doing some things that aren't mixed income, and I would love to learn more about that. But for us, this is very much a mixed income approach that is fundamentally reliant on the idea that market rate units will internally cross-subsidize NOI losses on affordable units once a building is stabilized and fully leased up. And that sort of long-term is critical for us. We are recognizing the city is not itself a development expert, and so partnerships with experienced private sector developers are key. And then 4 and 5, I think, very common here, the use of a locally funded revolving loan funds to take out expensive private equity, and the use of preferred senior debt and mezzanine debt as well to also decrease costs during the construction and permitting phase of financing. On the right, some of the things I think that are not necessarily unique only to Chicago, but I think are some of the ways in which we've had to thread our own needle on how this needs to work for us. One is the creation of a fully independent not-for-profit, which is known simply as the Residential Investment Corporation. This is not directly affiliated with the Chicago Housing Authority, nor is it an official subsidiary of the city. Although the board members are made up of a mix of ex officios from the city, as well as folks appointed by the mayor and approved by our city council. We saw public ownership here as critical, which I think is not all unique, but might be somewhat more unique, as we are not a concept of long-term ownership of housing in the state is very, very important for us. And it's one that is involved grappling with a different risk profile than we're used to, and trying to figure out how to get comfortable with that risk. As a LIHTC builder, we are frequently faced with needing to reallocate LIHTC and other sources of funding to recapitalizations, 15, 20, 25 years after we provided substantial funding for an affordable housing development. We are being asked to refund it again because the way in which that project is underwritten does not allow the owner of that property to maintain a sufficient capital reserve to make improvements when they're needed. And so they end up coming back to us for more money. That puts us in a really hard spot, and it really, really thins out the resources that we have to build and be the next number of units online. So really, we've been very focused on the concept of a one-time subsidy into a project that does not have to be repeated down the road. And then somewhat uniquely for us, the green and green social housing is a focus on sustainability and climate action. This is coming out of our sort of climate action planning as a city, as well as ongoing, really, really valid pushes from community advocacy groups that are continually reminding us that climate cannot continue to get short shrift on the city level. We know in the city of Chicago that just based on our cold winter season and the age of our housing stock generally, that a massive component of Chicago's overall carbon footprint actually comes from heating, building heating in the wintertime. And so that continues to be a huge focus that is a centerpiece of our program here. And then we are an independent not-for-profit, but we will be doing this work in close partnership with IDA, which is the Illinois Housing Development Agency, the statewide HFA, as well as the Chicago Housing Authority, both of which can make available certain funding streams that will help the Residential Investment Corporation make all of this work for us. You will recognize this slide. This full design credits here to Hanneke and the Invest Chattanooga team. I'm not going to run through the full capital stack because I know that she did substantially, but I do want to flag for us that our sort of 3 savings menu items here are a touch different than what Hanneke said. Yes, our revolving loan fund creates a savings opportunity in substantially decreasing the cost of private equity. Yes, access to lower cost debt For us, this is very likely to come through IDA for access to programs like the risk share program and other related sort of federal programs that they are already subscribers to, and that will decrease the cost of senior debt. And then for us, we don't have a property tax savings mechanism at present. That's not something that we as the city have, or even our housing authority, when it comes to mixed income housing, specifically has access to decreasing property tax through some sort of specialty carve out. So that's not available to us in the same way, but we are really excited about placing project-based vouchers from our housing authority into our buildings in order to further decrease that NOI need and create more affordability that way. Also, this won't be new to you based on the other presentations today, and I'm sure you've seen elsewhere, but I just want to flag in particular that where we are hoping to be is in that construction phase, bringing in our residential investment fund, as well as some combination of developer equity, other forms of city equity, and city land where it's available. Those two things together sort of make up the equity component of the initial financing, in addition to a senior construction debt piece, and allow these projects to pencil. And like you've heard from the others, that most, if not all, of that money would revolve out after the construction period to be replaced by mezzanine debt and allow us to continue to invest in projects. Where we are today, we started really with that transition plan from Mayor Johnson. And then interestingly enough for us, we funded this before we had the authority to do it. We passed as a part of the mayor's first couple of legislative pushes, a major development bond package that financed both affordable housing work as well as community development work. And one of the programs we specifically called out to be funded in that bond was the establishment of a social housing revolving fund. And again, that social housing revolving fund, nor the entity to create it existed. Neither of them existed at the time this bond was passed. So we had the capacity to sell bonds to do this, but we did not have the authority to do it. And so that launched for us an aggressive year of planning between last summer and this summer, which led to the passage of the enabling ordinance in May of this year, giving the housing department the authority to stand up this nonprofit. And then we just appointed the appointed board members just 2 weeks ago. So we are very much at the beginning of this process. Looking ahead, everything on this slide is sort of in the 6 to 12 months period from now. Convening the board in a couple of weeks, officially incorporating the Residential Investment Corporation as an Illinois not-for-profit, launching an RFI, staffing the RIC, procuring projects, creating a pipeline, underwriting those projects. Because this money is all sourced from the city, and because of the way in which our city council in Chicago functions, every one of these projects is going to require coming back to city council for project by project approval. And then we hope to have at least 2 projects with shovels in the ground next year, if not more. I do want to note, and I think both John and Hanneke talked a little bit about the multiple sources that they're considering to identify projects. And I think what we're doing in Chicago is quite similar, but I want to spell it out quite explicitly here that we are looking at 3 different pathways for project identification and the creation project pipeline. The first is this concept of a market rate project that is entitled, ready to go, but does not have its financing in order. Hanneke made a number of points that I don't need to make about the high cost and high return demands that are currently expected in the marketplace and what that's doing to the overall market rate housing development environment right now. And so if we can come in, replace their equity need, close the gap that they're currently experiencing, and get that project moving as quickly as possible. That's sort of pathway number one. Pathway number two, I think, is somewhat more strategic, but it's going to take us a little bit longer, is recognizing that we have a variety of city-owned land and sister agency-owned land that might be really, really perfect for projects like this. That includes school district land, it includes transit authority land. The transit authority land, by definition, is usually in what we call a transit served location, so it's sort of a TOD area. And so we're really excited about some of those properties as well. And then responsive to a number of strong voices in our city council, we've also expanded the mission of the RIC to include acquiring existing housing and rehabbing it as another, hopefully, affordable and rapid way of keeping units on the market and protecting units that might be at risk of degradation over time and keeping them in a state of high quality. We have experienced, I think, a number of very Chicago-specific challenges. One very large one has been around creating a legal structure for us that makes our risk managers comfortable with stepping into the new risk profile associated with housing ownership, thinking about how exactly the board and the not-for-profit corporation is structured and funded in order to create the necessary legal veils between the city and the RIC from a risk management perspective. For those familiar with sort of Chicago's fiscal climate, we're dealing with a long history of poorly managed pension debt, and so our unfunded mandates as a city remain high, and so there remains a lot of concern amongst our risk managers about what new risks we are adding to that portfolio, and that's been something we have to spend a lot of time and care with. Obviously, we have a very large and very opinionated city council that we've had to work with throughout this process and find a needle to thread between the mayor's vision and council's vision. And then the one thing that I think is very important to touch on is that green social housing for us and these housing production funds broadly, they can be many things, but they cannot be all the things, right? There is a lot of wiggle room that is created by introducing these preferred sources of financing and really changing the fiscal reality for these projects. But that wiggle room only goes so far, right? We can change market rent levels, we can increase affordability, we can deepen affordability as opposed to adding more units, we can change the neighborhoods where we're building, we can build green sustainable buildings, we can do many things, but as that list gets longer, it becomes harder and harder for the finances to square, and that's a challenge that we've faced thus far in socializing what our program intends to be. I think it's a challenge that we'll continue to face as we have to make hard choices between competing priorities once we're looking at projects themselves. Lessons learned, I think Center for Public Enterprise has been sage counsel for us, as I think they have been for many other cities, including Hanneke and John, if I'm not mistaken. There's a lot of working with and iterating on the work of peers, not the least of which is me ruthlessly stealing Hanneke's slides. Thank you, Hanneke. We are all very much in this together, and I think there has been and will continue to be a lot of opportunities for communities of practice across cities that are doing this work. And then that last one, passionate and strong leadership, and I mean that specifically in the board context. We are really, really blessed to have a wonderful incoming board of both ex officio existing staff city, as well as appointed board members who bring a wide range of expertises and perspectives, from asset management to real estate investment trust to affordable housing development, housing policy, bringing all of those different voices to the table and allowing them to come together to chart a path for the RIC, I think is the door we're about to open. I'm incredibly excited about that. And so I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. Um, I don't know if the emoji reaction functionality on a Zoom webinar is enabled here, but I'm sure if folks could, you would see lots of clapping emoji hands giving you a round of applause to all three of our panelists here. So we'll move into Q&A now, and I know there's been a number of questions put into the chat already. And John, you've been diligently answering a few questions on your own. And maybe we'll expand on some of those in a little bit, but I'll exercise the moderator privilege first and ask one question that I keep thinking about for all of these different communities that have made progress like this so far is, one common thread seems to be there's a champion, an elected official, a mayor, city administrator, somebody up at the top who is bought into this idea. They've embraced it and they're pushing it forward. And that makes this happen a lot quicker than it would otherwise. But we know that elected officials change, roles change, political conditions change. So as you all are building the infrastructure for these different models in your cities, how are you thinking about the not just the financial stability, but just the political sustainability to make sure that it can weather any winds that may blow in the future to prevent all this hard work from being dismantled or stymied in any way? And I'll let you all answer that in whatever order you may want.
I can take an initial stab. I think for us, the decisions around the formation of and the board makeup of the Residential Investment Corporation have been of substantial import and sort of very sort of a lot of conversation went into how that should be constructed. And there were multiple pulls on that process, right? I don't want to understate for us the role of our attorneys and our financial risk managers on shaping what they needed that process or what they needed that outcome to look like from a risk management perspective. And layered on that were some of, I think, the political things, Jonathan, that you're talking about in terms of creating an entity that will be able to continue its mission for the future. For us, we recognize housing development timelines are long. Building ownership and asset management is even longer. This is work that will take place over decades. So no matter what happens with the next mayoral election, this work is going to continue across many administrations and many councils. And so we really wanted to create a board structure that was empowered to make the choices that it would need to make going forward in 2, 5, 10, 20 years from now, while assigning it in city code a really clear mission that they would be continually obligated to follow. And that was sort of the way that we threaded that needle.
Yeah, I think a few things we were thinking about. One, I always love this sort of spectrum of errors of commission, errors of omission. And this idea that, and I think in government, I'm particularly sensitive to those errors of commission because everything is public record and there are sunshine laws and there's fraud and waste and abuse, and we need to avoid those things. And sometimes we restrict so far to make sure those things can't happen that we miss out on opportunities. And that's those errors of omission. So it's the work that we're not doing because we're so sort of strict on those things. And I think anyone who's worked with HUD dollars knows what it's like to avoid errors of commission. Like the rules are so strong that it's almost hard to do the right thing to actually achieve the outcome because there are so many rules to make sure you don't do a bad thing. These programs live further on that spectrum towards error, allowing for opportunities and maybe opening yourself up to risks of those errors of commission than we're typically comfortable with. And I think that that's so much of kind of Matt's comments about why legal teams and risk management, it is something new, it is something different, and there's a lot of concern that comes with that. And by all means, there needs to be the oversight to make sure that those real errors of commission cannot occur. But there's also a degree to which these organizations need to be flexible because that's the pace at which the market moves. And so, similarly, the makeup of our board has been such a strong component. Like, do we have trusted leaders in the board who know this business, who can understand these things? And so that our CEO is empowered to move quickly and doesn't have to go through 5 different approvals to be able to negotiate on a contract. And so that was one component, and then putting the organization somewhere with political oversight in the fact that the mayor appoints all board members of the housing authority as well as 2 of the board members of Invest Chattanooga. City council receives annual reporting, the organization is audited, um, but it is underneath the housing authority, which is a separate organization from the city and one that is built to last indefinitely, and I think built for the time horizons that you need in order to run housing. We were kind of very deliberate that anything managed by the city is vulnerable to those shifts in priorities. And so that was part of our kind of insulate but not isolate this organization. And I think the third component of that is the financial viability of the organization. Is it dependent on continual allocations of resources, or is it given a sort of nest egg, potentially in the future, additional nest eggs like Montgomery County received? But really, it is self-funded. So the buildings don't require ongoing operating subsidies. The organization itself is generating revenues through fees on its loans, interest on its fund, and cash flow from its assets, so that there is both a sort of financial existential necessity to continue doing the work, that those incentives are aligned, but also that you are not vulnerable in that way, sort of existentially, to political shifts. And that was kind of the thinking we had as we were locating this.
I think Matt and Hanneke covered anything I would have added, so I won't.
It's nice when other folks do that for you, right, John? Well, I'll go to one of the first questions that was asked earlier from Donna about the kind of the ongoing affordability, but also quality of life aspects for the tenants in the units that are getting built in the developments in this model, in terms of energy efficiency, indoor air quality, quality property management services, those life cycle elements that really, define the day-to-day quality of life elements for tenants. How are things like that built into the way that you approach or will be approaching developing units under this model, and how does that factor into broader compliance systems and objectives that you are either adapting from other programs or creating organically yourselves for the models that you're creating in your communities?
I've got some thoughts there, but John, if you want to start.
No, sure. I'll jump in. So it's always a trade-off, right? So you want to build the units, and you're already building units that you almost go out and get $100 worth of construction materials and then see how cheaply you can offer what you build with those construction materials. The math is already working against you. So we do everything we can, right? We try to compel certainly set certain standards, try to compel the developers to look into additional financing. So I know we're talking to a group in Virginia. So in Virginia, the Department of Housing and Community Development, I think I got that right, has a HIE program, HIEE. I forget what it stands for, but you're going to try to compel your developers to go after all of those types of financing programs. But again, a lot of the requirements for those types of programs actually end up adding expense to the project. So you just do the best you can on all of those while certainly setting the standard. I wanted to dig in a little bit more on that question. So one of the things, and again, I know there are people on this call that I've worked with in sort of past lives, so folks know that I come from an entity called Purpose Built Communities, where I worked before I came back to the private sector, and so I sort of drank the Kool-Aid on breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty, right? And so if you think about a kid growing up in any of the communities and any of the properties that we're helping to get financed, you want to make sure that that kid has as great a shot at the American dream as some of that kid's peers who may have been born in a different neighborhood, right? And so we know that high quality, affordable housing is a part of that, but we also know that community wellness is a huge part of that. We know that things like high quality early learning, education, et cetera, are a huge part of that as well. And so again, those aren't things that I have any actual hand in, right? I don't really have the ability, but one of the things that we can do is work with developers who have a track record and have a history of trying to find every way possible to sort of reach out beyond their specific development and incorporate as much of that type of additional wraparound service, those types of additional amenities in, as well as within the city of Atlanta, there's a person who's in charge of youth development, right? And so when I go out and we put out an RFQ, I'm making sure that she's looking at the RFQ, making sure that we're putting in whatever factors and points in the rubric that we can that are going to encourage developers who are going to think not only about sort of the ecological bottom line in addition to the financial bottom line, but also thinking about the much larger impacts for the families, especially the children. We're going to call these places home.
Thanks, John.
And
Matt, go ahead, Hanneke.
Sure, just a few things to add kind of in how we achieve those quality outcomes for the long-term sort of life of the project. I think a lot of this comes back to making sure the incentives of the organization are aligned with the well-being of the tenants. And there's a few kind of structures that discipline that behavior. One is if the goal is permanent affordability, then these assets are our concern forever. And so maintaining them to a good standard, building them at high quality to begin with, these are ways to make sure we are saving costs over time. And part of that is, I think, unlike public housing, which was underwritten with the assumption of continual operating support that decreased over time, these buildings are underwritten in a sort of self-funded manner. And so you make sure with your underwriting, you leave enough money for maintenance. And that's important because we're not building and then selling in 5 years. Another component that disciplines that is these buildings are 70% market rate. And so you are competing for tenants with other Class A properties in the city. And so if you let the thing fall apart, you're not going to collect those market rate rents. And so the whole building is upside down financially. And so that's a real appeal of mixed income across the board is you have to compete in the market for those market rate tenants. Other ways in our underwriting, we can kind of pass benefits along to tenants is where are our assumptions on escalation of rents, escalation of operating costs? You know, an aggressive market rate developer may underwrite to 3 or 4% annual rent increases. We like to stick at 2%. That's a way we can pass benefits on not just to the tenants in affordable units, but also in the market rate units that they know where their rent's going to go year over year. So these are other ways in kind of being a more active partner at the development table, we're able to build in the sorts of things that make it easier to maintain a quality portfolio over a long period of time.
Great. Thanks, Hanneke. I'll move on to Patricia's question here, which is kind of on a similar issue in terms of strategies within the framework of this model to address the quality of existing rental stock within your community. So I got the sense that, by and large, the types of development that you're pursuing are new construction and building new units and adding on to the supply of mixed income rental housing in your cities. But Matt, I know you mentioned in one of your last slides that something you are looking at in the future is acquisition and rehab of existing multifamily properties. John and Hanneke, is that something that you all are also looking at either sooner or deeper into the future? And just more broadly, kind of building on what you all were just answering, do you see opportunities to, make these types of programs, help up the game of private landlords in your cities who may not be offering the highest quality rental housing?
Yeah, I think what I'd say there is the advantage of creating organizations like this is you have the flexibility to respond to opportunities in the market. And so there's a lot of investment capital that has pulled out of new construction because there's a sense that we're going to be able to buy buildings at below replacement cost. And part of that's because rents have softened. So developers who maybe underwrote to ever increasing rents are going underwater. So there's a sense like there's an opportunity here. We can respond to that opportunity if it comes up in our market. And so we have not ruled it out by any means. Um, but I think our focus has been like, where can we be additive? So where there are other players that kind of do Lenoa acquisition approaches, we don't need to compete with them. We really have with our housing production fund something we can offer on the new construction side, but we will not rule out any good opportunity.
I would agree with that. I would say they're really sort of on the acquisition side. What we're finding are at least three buckets, right? So, I want to answer the question directly. It sounds to me, all right. So the three buckets are, a Class A or close to Class A property, maybe that never made it fully through construction and is now an opportunity, right? And that's a property that you otherwise wouldn't have any chance to get affordability into. And then there's sort of a B-ish property that's maybe operating, but now it's about 20 years old, and so it needs a refresh. But to Hanneke's point, sort of the cycle where we are in the market, it doesn't have as many buyers looking at that property to refresh it and get it back to an A property. And then I'd say bucket three are problem properties, right? So bucket three are properties where it's, sort of a bad actor landlord or just maybe a non-responsive landlord. So we don't necessarily look at bucket three. There is a division within the city's housing innovation lab that's what they do, right? And they've got carrots and sticks and all those sorts of things that they can work with landlords to encourage them to be better landlords. We look at, when we get those calls about the, sort of bucket one, we're super excited about that because a lot of times that's an opportunity to put affordability in a part of town that we wouldn't otherwise get a shot at. And then bucket two, we get, to Hanneke's point, because there's less sort of competition, if you will, in the market for those. We get those calls now as well. And so, the beauty of acquiring properties is that, gosh, when you start thinking about ground up development, you're talking years, right? Versus we can buy a property, and even if it needs a bit of rehab, we can get that property. And oftentimes, if it needs a bit of rehab, that probably means it's got some vacancy, which also is a decrease in the price that we're going to pay for it. So we can get it. We can work with a developer to, bring it back up to standards that we'd all be proud to put our name on, and we can get that back on the market within months.
Thanks, John. Matt, was there anything that you want to add on that question?
No, I think John's analysis of the three options is probably right on. I think there's a world where Chicago might be interested in that third bucket, in that, problem property, bad landlord, probably existing low-income tenants who are living in like less than ideal conditions and need, the building needs a refresh, that building typology is probably in a neighborhood where it is financially infeasible for a market participant to see profit in or even break even in doing the recap that that building deserves. And so is there a social good opportunity for the RIC, even potentially to take a loss on acquiring and improving a building like that and adding it to its portfolio? I think it's something that we're looking at. But again, I think especially with rehabs, we get back into that these funds can be many things, but they can't be all the things dynamic, right? The more of those projects we do, the harder the portfolio gets to manage because other properties may be throwing off less income to that cross subsidization.
Thanks, Matt. We'll stick with you to answer the pair of questions from Alice that she had during your presentation. First part is to maybe describe a little bit more about the mechanics of how the cross subsidy works across the units, and then avoiding the second bite at the apple and maybe mitigating the need for significant preservation investments down the road for some of these properties, again, to kind of make them more sustainable. I'll let you start, and then John and Hanneke, if you've got anything you want to add onto this topic, feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll actually start with the second question that's saying that almost answers the first question. And Hanneke did speak to this in a related way a few minutes ago, right? So any building owner, whether it's legally subsidized, legally required to be affordable, or naturally occurring affordable, or sort of class A, definitely not affordable. Any of those property owners have lots of draws on their operating income that they collect from rents, right? They've got to pay back their lenders, got to pay their property taxes, and they've got to pay for building upkeep. And then hopefully they're also investing money and putting it away in the soft drawer for the eventual point in time when their boiler breaks or they need a new roof, right? Same thing that any of us who are homeowners have to do ourselves on a much smaller scale. The ability of a LIHTC developer to pull out that kind of money from a project that they are operating at 90 to 100% affordability, 60%, AMIs, 50% AMIs, it's essentially impossible for a LIHTC developer to save anything for those kinds of necessary big capital reserves. And so 10 years, 15 years, 20 years goes by, and all of a sudden those properties are in need of millions of dollars of capital investment that they don't have the money to do. And that's when they come back to us, often for 4% tax credits to go through a recapitalization, get another investment of equity that they weren't able to save themselves, and reinvest in that building. The model works, right? One of the benefits is that it allows us to refresh our affordability commitments. So if they were a 25-year affordability commitment or 30-year affordability commitment, they come to us at year 20 for more money. That comes with a new 25 or 30-year affordability commitment. And so we're able to keep those units affordable in perpetuity, but at a cost, because that money is money that or those tax credits we could have put into creating new units that we don't get to. And so that's when we get into Alice's first question, which gets back to this concept of cross-subsidization, which is in a 100% affordable building, unless you have, generally speaking, a building full of tenant-based or project-based vouchers, you are very likely never going to be generating sufficient operating income to cover your costs. And that is the fundamental challenge of a LIHTC or 100% affordability building. The mixed income approach allows the market rate units to generate enough rent larger than the unit average costing needs to take the profit created there and sort of transfer it to cover the gap created by the affordable units. And that's what I mean when I say internal cross-subsidization. I don't know, John, I know Hanneke just dropped and she sort of kind of eloquently spoke to that as well earlier. I don't know if there's anything that you would want to add to there.
I think that's it. I think, the reality is it's I describe AUD sometimes as the affordable housing Swiss Army knife. So we don't really draw very clear, hard distinctions in the city of Atlanta. We try not to about sort of who does what and who gets credit for it. So I think there's always going to be some degree of that. And as long again, if it matters who gets credit, then it doesn't work as well. But if it doesn't matter who gets credit and it's all city of Atlanta writ large, I don't know. It doesn't matter as much to me.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, John. And yeah, Hanneke had to drop off. She is a victim of her own success and had another webinar to get to. So we're very grateful for her time. But now we're going to go to a question that'll get asked live by Chris Jensen, who, if he is still on, I think Eric should enable him to chat. And some of you may recognize Chris,
Yep.
who's now on the West Coast, but formerly worked here at the City of Richmond. And good to see you, Chris. What's up?
Hey, Jonathan, and thank you to the panel. It's really exciting to hear what all you have going on in Atlanta, Chattanooga, and Chicago. I'm with the Housing Authority of the City of LA, and not trying to hijack this webinar, but I'd be remiss if I didn't share a little bit about what we've been doing. Um, our approach to social housing has been to purchase market rate Class A multifamily and then apply an affordability restriction to a spread of the units. This approach really comes uh, to address four goals of ours to, of course, increase the supply of affordable housing. A big driver of this is to create an opportunity for our tenant-based voucher holders to have a place to rent. In California, that's still a problem with landlords illegally discriminating against tenant-based voucher holders. Um, you know, like John was saying, it's also much less expensive for us to acquire properties, and it's much faster than for us to build. We purchased 24 properties in the past 4 years, over 2,000 units at a cost of 407,000 per unit. And coming from Virginia, that number seems astronomical, but the cost for a market developer to build out here is 5 to 600,000 per unit. And for a public entity, you tack on 30% to that. So we're getting units faster and less expensive. And then, the fourth reason for this approach is diversification of revenue for the housing authority. Like everyone else, we're terrified about the impending cuts to HUD, and we're trying to shore up our financial base to continue to do our work. Um, I'd love to talk with some of you folks offline or in another forum about how we're financing these deals, but yeah, we're really doing some exciting stuff out here.
Chris, thanks for sharing. And good to know you still pay attention to what we're doing over here in Virginia.
Well, of course, I'll be back sooner or later.
All right. And Chris, if there's some material that kind of succinctly explains what you've been up to at the Housing Authority there, please share it with us and we'll include it in the follow-up material that we send to all the attendees, including all the slides from the panelists here today. All right. Matt or John, we've got a few minutes left, but no need to drag this on. We've been at it for almost an hour and a half now, and really grateful for your time and for all the time of attendees here. Any last words or comments or suggestions that you have for us before we call it a day?
I'll just echo something that Matt said. We at AUD would not be anywhere close to where we are if it had not been for the folks in Montgomery County being so open and just, I mean, we went to visit, we brought, everyone who eventually ended up on our board, we brought some team members, we brought folks from the city's Housing Innovation Lab, and we just went and visited their site and sat down and we asked every question possible. And then we came home and came up with more questions and asked more. And that is the only way that this work gets done, right? And so Hanukkah joke, they did steal, Matt Bledsoe, who's awesome, and I'm glad for him, and I'm glad for Chattanooga. But the only way any of this works is if nobody's starting from scratch, right? So nobody should be starting from a blank slate. Nobody should be trying to beat their head against the wall, trying to figure out how to figure out all these different components together. Pick up the phone and call and say, hey, can we come to Atlanta? Hanukkah has been to Atlanta multiple times. We've talked with Matt and the folks in Chicago. Like, this has to be a community of practice, and that is the only way that this will work.
I've got nothing to add to that. Just, we're in our own ways, every single person on this call, right? We're all fighting the same battle on different fronts, right? And building community, whether it's in a specific community of practice for a specific topic like this one, or just generally to share in the pains and successes of being in this space, I think is proving to be perennially important. So I appreciate spaces like this. Thank you so much for bringing it together and for inviting us. It's a privilege to get to talk about the work and hear from other cities in a more formal way that I've gotten to recently. So thank you, and thanks everyone for listening.
Great. Thank you both. And thanks to Hanukkah and thanks to all the attendees who joined us here today. Just one last thing before you go, we will be prompting a little survey for attendees that should appear when the webinar closes. Please take 10 seconds out of your day before you go to lunch to fill out a couple of those questions. Those really help us demonstrate to our funders and our sponsors that events like we have today are meaningful and have an impact. We know that they do, but having some data to show them is very helpful and helps us make sure that we're on the right track. And if anybody ever has any ideas or suggestions for topics for webinars that we can host or try to pull together, please reach out anytime. So if you register for this event, you will be also getting an email probably early next week with the slides from the presenters, other information, and a recording of the webinar as well that you can share with colleagues who may not have been able to join. So thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.